Viewers, you are welcome to your favorite program, EYEWITNESS. This is a program that has conversations with Nigerians who have contributed to the promotion of the public good, of public interest, people whose lives have shown a determination to leave the country better than they have found it. Each week, we bring such Nigerians to share their experiences and to talk about Nigeria's public good. Our narrative is different from the usual story that all Nigerians are corrupt, that Nigerians are only interested in self-indulgence and self-aggrandizement. There are other types of Nigerians, and it is important that we get to meet these other Nigerians. That's why EYEWITNESS exists as a program for the new Nigerian. Today, our topic is Nigeria's labor movement. The labor movement in this country has often been a very turbulent one. It has had its high points, it has had its low points. Currently, labor is very much on the news because of the current ongoing strike by the Academic Staff Union of universities. But I think more profoundly because of the despondency of so many workers in this country that find themselves in very difficult situations. It is for that reason that we invited a veteran labor leader, a one-time general secretary of the Nigerian Labour Conference, John Oda. John, you are welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Prof, for having me.
Let's start with your background. We always do that. Where were you born and where did you do your primary school?
Thank you. I was born in a small village in Benue State, in Ingle Dumoga, in present-day Okpoku local government of Benue State. My father being a primary school teacher, I attended 3 primary schools. First, at St. Michael's Primary School, Ingle, and subsequently I went to stay with my dad briefly for a couple of years when he was teaching at St. Patrick's Primary School in Okpaile, which is in the southern part of our district. And I completed my primary school. Well, I didn't complete. I completed the remaining part of my primary school at St. Michael's again, primary school in Ajide. I left after my 5th year in primary school and passed the common entrance to the famous Mount St. Michael Secondary School, Aliede, which is going to be 70 next year. At Mount St. Michael Secondary School, Aliede is one of the old schools in the then Benue Plateau province. And when we went to the school, we discovered that there were Nigerians from different parts of the country. And that's how I started secondary school, and I finished in 78 and went on the following year to University of Jos, where I read sociology.
Okay, before coming to the university, let's just talk more about your early years. By the way, one of your old school seniors, Cardinal John Onaikan was on this program a couple of months ago, and he did speak about how wonderful the school was and his own exploits in the school. Although he did warn us that sometimes his exploits are exaggerated. But nomadic life in primary school, moving from one school to the other at a very young age, how did you feel about that? Were you excited? Do you feel it's an opportunity to travel and see new things, or you are just annoyed with too many travels?
At that early stage in life, one just saw this thing as one form of adventure or the other. And when my father decided to leave teaching and eventually went to work as a relatively junior staff in the federal service, in the Federal Survey Department, I felt a sense of relief when I now went to the last primary school because of the type of discipline which he insisted in putting me through. With my old man, it wasn't just enough to be good. You have to be extra good. You have to be excellent. So when I went to my third primary school, I had a sense of freedom. I was able to do a number of things like other young kids could do. But I think by then I was already formed, and my headmaster and my teachers were quite happy with me because of the type of discipline I brought from my previous primary school. And after one or two terms, I started being among those who were leading the class. So we had healthy academic competition even in that young age.
But how was social life in primary school, secondary school? Did you have much of a social life at that young age?
I think the community life was extraordinary because when you finish from school, you come settle into the life of the community. You join your age group, you do the things that young people do, help where possible in the farms, or when you are not going to the farm, you play in the communal playground in the community, and everybody knew the other family and all of that. And it was good in the 70s, late 60s and 70s, living in the village, and you were socialized to the norms of your community. And one wish that one still have those environments so that our children could go through what we went through.
In that part of the world, you are forced to eat pounded yam every day. Did you find that oppressive?
No. You were born into it, so you get socialized into it. And if there was no pounded yam, then the food is not complete. If, rice eventually was introduced, but we saw rice as a food for literally ceremonial occasions on Sundays and on big occasions like Easter and Christmas. But otherwise, you eat roasted yam as breakfast, and maybe boiled yam if your parents are in the farm for lunch, and then for dinner you have to eat pounded yam.
Wow, that's very excessive, but I guess, as you said, you are used to it. Let's come to your university life. When did you get to university, and how did you find it?
We were the first set to do JAMB in 1978, but we didn't have guidance. So all of us chose ABU, all those in my class. And what then happened was ABU was not admitting through JAMB because it had SBS. And by the time we recognized it was too late. Plus, our set, even though we did quite well in the WAEC, with I think about 13 or so out of the 2 classes having Division 1, our result was released, I think, a month or so later, and that affected our ability to go to school. So I had to rewrite JAM the following year, and then I went to University of Jos in September, October of 1979. And my guardian wanted me to read law. I had to trick them and applied to read sociology. So when the admission came out, there was a spirited effort to say, no, okay, wait, go to SBS and SBS area instead of this JOS, where they are offering you sociology, which we are not sure you will be able to get work afterwards. But I had already made up my mind that I wanted to read sociology, so I got my uncle's wife to go and plead with my uncle to say that maybe if he didn't go now, he will not be able to pass. My uncle said, no, look, this man is very intelligent, he will pass. Anyway, I have to cut a long story short. He took me to University of Jos, and we were, I think, about the first or second set to do a 4-year university system because they were facing out the higher school certificates and then going straight from secondary school to university to do a 4-year program. So we were among the first set of people that did that.
So how was academic life in the University of Jos?
I'm not sure I had a lot of academic life because I had the fortune or misfortune. After my first year in the university, I got involved in a number of activities which were not fully academic but which were profoundly affected my life. Subsequently, I became a member of the Movement for the Advancement of African Society, MAS, which was doing a lot of educational classes to for us to read about what was going on in other societies, African societies, Latin America, and places where revolution taking place. So we did all of that, and then we found ourselves in the student union. In my second year, I was in the student union parliament. In the third year, I was in the executive, and I think as welfare secretary. And in the departmental level, I was secretary of the Jos Sociological Student Association. I think in the second year, in the third year, I became the president, and we put our hands on doing a whole lot of things. But I think perhaps maybe because it's social sciences, the extra academic work that we were doing, I think it helped in the sense that even though we were not doing the typical reading like those who just concentrate on just their syllable as students. But at the end of the day, we didn't do too bad.
Okay, just to make it clear to our viewers, his coded language means he was a radical student activist in the university, because I think you are not very clear in exactly what that meant. And I think it's interesting for our viewers to know what pushed you towards radicalism. Why that pathway? There are other pathways. You could have devoted your university life to being a good member of the Christian Union or joined social clubs for dancing. Why choose a radical socialist path?
I think, given the type of background we are coming from, it was obvious that if we wanted to do a course where we will become individually rich, if you are rich, perhaps you are able to help a given number of people, your immediate family and all of that. But we were coming from an environment where up to that time, and unfortunately for up till now, a number of our communities go without pipe-borne water. So we collect water from the stream and rivers to drink. You didn't have public health system and all of that. So you had witnessed firsthand growing up in the villages what not having these modern amenities mean and how they impact on your life. So when we went to the university, we were looking for, we were very eager when we were exposed to the fact that there were societies where government was able to provide these basic amenities for its people. And we discovered that the society that were more able to do this were socialist countries. I think that was one of the things that got us into that part in life. And we believe that if we got our government to serve the people, then we are able to have good education for the people, we are able to have good health care, we are able to have quality life and so on and so forth. And I think that decisively pushed us to the socialist path.
Well, you are not called to the bar in Lagos, but you are called to the NLC. That transition, was it smooth, coming from a radical socialist background as a student leader to the Nigerian Labour Congress? When did you go to the Nigerian Labour Congress?
Yeah, okay. I think this coincided with the May 1986 student protests in Zaria, where I think the government agreed, the then Commissioner of Finance, Commissioner of Police in Kaduna State, only 4 students were killed. And the students were protesting over living condition in the university campus. And I was at this point in the process of finishing my master's program at the university. And my friend, the late Emmanuel Ezeazu, who was himself a postgraduate student at the University of Nigeria, Nsukka, had earlier in March been elected president of the National Association of Nigerian Students. So when the ABU crisis happened, Labaran Maku, who was a close colleague and a member of the Movement for the Advancement of African Society, who was in second year, had been elected president of NANS and president of the University of Jos Student Union. And he was also NANS PRO. So the movement in Jos had the responsibility to try to mobilize people, the student unions in that environment. Eventually, we went to to University of Nigeria in Nsukka, where the late Chima Obani was president of the student union, and we had the meeting of what was called the NANS Senate, where it was decided that we should call for a nationwide strike action in protest against the killing in Zaria and to demand for justice. We also decided, after closing down Nsukka, to go in a convoy to Lagos to address the press and to call on the Nigeria Labour Congress to do solidarity with the NANS. Because in March, the deputy president of the NSC, Lawrence Peterside, had come and given a historic address to the NANS conference that elected Ezeazu, saying that the alliance between the workers and the students was historical. So we landed in Lagos and met with the NSC leadership, then under Ali Chiroma and late Dr. Lasisi Otsunde. Salisu Mohammed and I think Hashim were, and Lawson Osage were some of the senior officers of the NSC. That meeting led to the decision of the NSC to call for a nationwide one-day protest in solidarity with NANS on June 4, 1986. Unfortunately, the government scuttled this, but the action still went, even though they tried to scuttle it by arresting the leadership of the NSC and keeping them in detention for about 11, 12 days. It went on all the same, and at the end of all of that, the NANS asked the NSC to withdraw Dr. Osunde from the federal government panel, and ASU also decided to withdraw. And at the end, the NSC leadership felt that the way the students were able to articulate their issues and the dynamism they saw, they wanted some of the student activists who were finishing school to join them. And so eventually they did an interview of a number of people, and Chombagu, Issa Remu, Chris Uyot, and myself were appointed into the NSC at the beginning of 1987. So that was how my journey in the trade union began.
So maybe we go back to first principles. Why do trade unions exist, and what do they do?
Yeah, trade unions exist basically to fight for the rights of workers in a work environment, to protect the interests of workers, and going back to the colonial era, after trying to resist trade unions as a result of what happened in England, by 1938, the colonial government discovered that they couldn't suppress the trade unions any longer.
We'll stop at 1938. We have to take a short break. And then when we come back, you'll continue from 1938. Okay. We'll be right back, viewers. Welcome back, viewers. We were still with John Oda, former General Secretary of the Nigerian Labour Congress, a veteran trade unionist, and who falls into the category we call as progressives in this country. He was just talking to us more broadly about the role trade unions play in society, and I think you were at 1938.
Yes,
Go ahead.
Thank you, Prof. I was making the point that by 1938, when the British colonial authorities were forced to grant trade unions as a legitimate organization in East colonies in West Africa, so unions were able to organize, and one of the first things is they organized against was the discrimination between the colonial officers, the wages of colonial officers, the privileges of colonial officers, and the indigenous workers, whether in the then Gold Coast or in Sierra Leone or in Nigeria, as the case may be. And even though it was only in 1938 that the colonial government recognized trade unions, but our trade union history go back to 1912, when migrant workers from Sierra Leone worked with other Nigerians to establish the Nigerian Civil Service Union, what was then called the Southern Nigerian Civil Service Union. So with that history, and some of the key points of our colonial history was the Iva Valley massacre in November of 1949, where because the coal miners were asking for for their rights, the colonial government shot a number of them, and this triggered the anti-colonial sentiment and the call for Nigerian independence. So when regular historians talk about our independence being gotten on a platter of gold, they don't take into consideration the fact that workers had actively shed their blood to try to get to where we were in 1960.
That's a very rich history. Coming back to more recent times, at what period were you the General Secretary of the Nigerian Labour Congress?
I think after the Abacha second ban on the Nigerian Labour Congress from 1994, when Pascal Bafia was president of the NSC, as a result of the strike action that the oil sector unions were involved in, and a number of the trade unions. I think Abacha was angry that the NSC leadership under Bafia was not able to control them. And that was one of the reasons why they banned the NSC. And the NSC remained banned till he died 4 years later. So it was one of the first actions of the Abdul Salami leadership was to remove the decree that banned the NSC. So by this time, I had been in the NSC for some time, but the sole administrator that was appointed, the second sole administrator that was appointed by Abacha, threw me out of the NSC. So I started working as an informal international officer for the Committee of Industrial Unions. And this was the situation. And I was at a stage we were not allowed, we were not able to fly through the regular route to go outside the country, and had to find my way through the land borders to go to Ghana in Accra, where Somonu was General Secretary of OATU, that is the Organization of African Trade Union Unity, where I kept my international passport. I'll go and do my campaigns about the situation in Nigeria, drop my passport, and then return to Nigeria using an ECOWAS pass or one of those documents. By the time Abacha died and the NSC was restored, by December 1998, Adams Oshomole was elected president of the NSC. So one of the first actions that leadership took was to say that the sole administrator didn't appoint me, or Salisu Mohammed, who was also sacked, and I think Chris was also sacked, and therefore the sack from the NSC was null and void. So Salisu, being the most senior officer then left, was made acting general secretary of the NSC, and I think I was next to him, so I was made deputy general secretary. We tried to appoint a general secretary by advertising. I think 2 people were shortlisted, Barrister Shola Eji and Abdullahi Shef were comrade. But when the National Executive Council of the NSC met in Umahia, Abia, in I think around May or June of March of 2001, for some reasons they didn't find the 2 appointable. So I was confirmed Deputy General Secretary and made to act. December of that same year, 2001, I was confirmed General Secretary.
So it was a difficult time for the NLC. They've suffered a lot from military dictatorship. How were you able to play a role in resuscitating the vibrancy of the Nigerian Labour Congress?
I think that when we came back from the ban, and also from the experience we had during the ban, where there were very conscious efforts by the then Minister of Labour, late Uba Ahmed, to ensure that all the prominent trade union leaders, people like Sylvester Ejiofor, people like Adams Oshomole, who were general secretaries, were not available to lead the NSC because they didn't want people they couldn't control. So they promulgated, the military promulgated decrees to say that certain categories of union officers couldn't apply to be president of the NSC, couldn't stand to be president of the NSC. There was a lot of mobilization, which Ejiofor, Oshomole, and the others did in conscientizing the rest of the leadership of the NSC to say that if we allow government to dictate who can and who cannot be leaders of the NSC, then that is the easiest way to make this organization redundant. So a number of educational programs took place around that time. And by the time the military, Abacha left, we had a clear path that to be able to reclaim the image of the NSC, we needed to have an activist organization. And I think Adams Oshomole, who then became president, showed tremendous leadership in that sense. We were bold in reaching out to the rest of civil society organizations, and we did things together. And Nigerians will recall the many protests we had against government policies. By this time, President Obasanjo had been elected president, and with his military background, I think he sought to cow the trade unions, but Adams and his colleagues in the movement stood firm. We were able to mobilize all strata of Nigerians against the incessant increases in the price of petroleum products. We won many of the battles, we lost some of them, but Nigerians saw that if you have a courageous labor movement, you could stop government from some of its excesses. I think that is one of the things we can say about that, the period immediately after the ban on the NSE, up to 1987 when Adams completed his 2 terms as president of the NSE.
So what's the state of trade unionism today?
I think that the trade unions are finding themselves in a very difficult situation. Some of the momentum that was there had definitely not been sustained. And this is because in the last seven or so years, this particular regime has been very hostile to trade unions. And this had been responsible for some of the problems that the unions have gotten. The last minimum wage of 30,000 was negotiated under the previous presidency of the country, under Jonathan. I'm sorry to say that up to now, a number of the states have refused to implement in a progressive and complete way this 30,000 minimum wage. And given the way the Naira had been allowed by the central bank and by extension the federal government to slide, and the fact that inflation have gone very high, now this 30,000 is not even able to buy a proper bag of rice for a family. So workers, despite the effort of the trade unions, going through a very difficult period presently.
Yeah, all Nigerians, I think, are suffering today with the cost of living crisis. Everything is out of the roofs. But maybe one issue some Nigerians may be surprised about is the extent to which the NLC has committed itself to a political party, the Labour Party, which it has been supporting in quite a loud manner. Maybe you should explain a bit the relationship between trade unions and politics.
Well, I think maybe the best metaphor to use is to say that the instrument of collective bargaining, which we use as trade unions to try to improve the living standard of workers, is ultimately determined by politics. And if we go back to our history, right from even the colonial period, the fact that our labor leader number 1, Michael Imodu, was an essential critical member of the National Council of Nigerians and Cameroon, and later National Council of Nigeria and Nigerian citizens. And he was a member of the NCNC delegation to the independence talk in Britain. Go to show the fact that you can't separate politics from labor seriously. And some of the engagements and the disagreements within the Nigerian trade union movement or in the 50s and the 60s was the fact that there was a segment of the trade unions that didn't like the active political role that people like Imodu, Nduka Eze and co were playing. So historically, there's been this relationship with political parties. And even in the Second Republic, Paimodu, then very advanced in age, was vice president of the PRP. So we can't, therefore, if people follow the historical development of this country, we can't exactly say that trade unions are strangers to politics. In the First Republic, there was the Socialist Workers, Farmers and Peasant Party, which Wahab Goodluck and co were led. And SOZ was a member of the Central Committee, Sylvester Ejiofor, that is, who is one of the leading trade union leaders till recently when he retired, was one of the leaders of this party. When, of course, in the African continent, we can see the example of Chuluba, who transited from being president of the Zambian Congress of Trade Unions to defeating Kenneth Kaunda, one of the leading African nationalists who had led Zambia for over 26 or 27 years. And come back to our sub-region, Sekou Touré, the founding president of Guinea-Conakry, was started as a trade union leader. He led the teachers union. And Siaka Stephen in Sierra Leone was general secretary of the Sierra Leone Labour Congress before he moved on to be president of Sierra Leone. But regarding the role the NSA have played in forming the Labour Party, could be said that this is in consonance with what happened in Britain, where the current Labour Party was formed over 100 and so years ago by the TUC, by the trade unions that were affiliated to the Trade Union Congress of the United Kingdom. And in the Scandinavians, either in Norway, you see the Labour Party has over 100 years of relationship with the LO Norway, the counterpart of Nigeria Labour Congress. So we took our bearing from what was going on around the world to reach the decision to form the Labour Party.
Actually, just to add to that, what we call the Nigerian nationalist movement that started after the Second World War was led by three leaders, Hubert Macaulay, who was then the elderly nationalist, Michael Imodu, and Nnamdi Azikiwe. They toured the entire Nigeria addressing what they call the cost of living crisis that came after the Second World War.
Yeah.
Today, Nigerians are encountering another cost of living crisis. So maybe it's not at all surprising that political engagement by the labor movement is ongoing. So that brings me to the whole question of the elections coming around. What's your perspective of the 2023 elections? Are you optimistic or pessimistic?
Well, Malam, we have been in this process of trying to help to reform the electoral system in the country, in the sense that when the Yaradua government appointed the 22-person committee, you were a member of the committee in your individual right, and I was then General Secretary of the NSC. And the NSC decided to nominate me to be on the committee. And the progress that was made when the Jonathan government appointed Atahiru Jega, Professor Atahiru Jega, who was a member of the 22-person committee, I think in a lot of ways had been carried on by his successor, the current INEC chairman, and some of the members of the INEC, including our friend Festus Okoye, who was in the 22-person committee. So to that extent, we can't afford to be pessimistic about the difficulties that our country is facing as far as our electoral system is concerned. We have to continue to hope that the technology that has been introduced to try to cut the terrible things that politicians have been doing to always rig the election, we have to continue to hope that this technology will work and will clean up our electoral system.
So you are hopeful. I still have 2 minutes, so I'll ask my last question, which is about ASU. Everybody is saying, what's the way forward? How do we end the ASU strike? How do we address the crisis? You have 2 minutes to advise us.
Okay. Basically, again, I think we have to, the blame for the ASU prolonging the strike is squarely in the hand of government, because if you subscribe to voluntary negotiation, then you can't just walk away from this negotiation. And I think that is what has happened. But having said that, it's clear that this government is not about to take this issue head on and provide the solutions. So the Nigerian Labour Congress, where the Academic Staff Union of universities is affiliated to, needs to now see the type of behind-the-scenes thing it can do to bring the two parties to resolve the problem, so that as children who have been at home in the last 6 months plus can go back to work. When the next government then comes, then the 8 or so unions in the educational institution who are affiliated to the Nigerian Labour Congress can then come together working with the NSC to make a proposition on how the funding crisis, the infrastructural crisis, and the general crisis of education, not only in the tertiary institution, but the lower rung of our educational institution can be addressed. This, in my opinion, is the way forward.
Thank you very much, John Oda. It's been a fascinating conversation on the Nigerian labor movement, the role of progressive movements, why trade unions are important in society, and why from the beginning of history, trade unions have always been involved, implicated in politics. Thanks for your visit. Hope to see you another time.
Thanks, Prof, for having me on the program.